Hi, and welcome to the 70th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, and I'm joined today from left to right on my screen by Ed. Ed, would you like to say hi, give your name, tell us where you're from, and tell us something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Hi, I'm Ed Dixon from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I'm really excited to try to use TiddlyWiki as an educational tool in some of the projects that I work with.
Brilliant. Great to have you with us again, Ed. And Eric, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
I'm always dumbfounded as to which order they appear on your screen versus mine. So, hello, I'm Eric Schulman. I'm the author of Tiddly Tools, the keeper of TiddlyWiki Classic Core, and soon to be the author of Inside TiddlyWiki, the Missing Manual. And I'm located in Silicon Valley, California.
There's something problem here.
Oh, what's going on, Matias? Matias is reporting a problem. Mario, would you like to carry on and say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mario Pitsch from Austria, near Salzburg. Contributor to TiddlyWiki Classic with themes and plugins, and for TiddlyWiki 5, creating the German translation, documentation, and contributing a little bit to the group.
Indeed. Great to have you here. Thank you for joining us, Mario. And Matias, how are you doing? Would you like to say hello and introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Yes, so I am Matias. I go by the name of Matt on the boards. I'm a long-time user. Jerry found out it was from 2007. And yeah, I really love TiddlyWiki, and I try to contribute in the way that I can, which is not in code, but more in I don't know, a view from a user. And I'm particularly interested in trying to see what we can do to make TiddlyWiki popular. Simply, you know, to make newcomers feel that they should stick with TiddlyWiki.
Indeed, and Matias has made over the years a number of very helpful suggestions, in fact, that have been incorporated into TiddlyWiki over the years. So Matias, thank you. Great that you could join us. Nathan, would you like to say hi, where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki? And Nathan is saying in the sidebar, I'm Nathan, a dev from the US, and I have no mic today. So me and other people will try and relay what Nathan is saying in the sidebar chat window into the main window. Finally, Tobias, would you like to say hi, where you're from, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
I think you need to enable Tobias again because he's disabled.
Oh, yes. There you go, Tobias. Sorry, you are now enabled. Hello.
Yeah, sorry, it's the Hangout open for like 2 windows. I don't know why. So yes, I'm Tobias from Leipzig, Germany, and I've been using TiddlyWiki for quite a few years. The classic version, I've been doing lots of plugin development, I presume. I have been a bit abstinent for the past year, I guess, and now trying to catch up since about a week or so, or maybe 2.
Indeed.
With lots of interesting things going on.
You were a fixture 18 months ago, and then you disappeared. But it's good to have you back. Glad.
Yes, glad to be back.
Again. Felix, hi. We're still on the intros. Would you like to say hello and say where you're from and introduce your work with TiddlyWiki?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm from Germany, Hamburg, Germany, and I am working on the TiddlyWiki task graph plugin at the moment.
Indeed. You've been amazingly productive, Felix, and for your trouble, I think you're now groaning under the weight of a number of requests from the community for new features and enhancements. And finally, Ton, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ton Gerne from the Netherlands, long-time user of TiddlyWiki, and a little bit more than a year now experimenting with TiddlyWiki 5. made a few guides about layouting things in TiddlyWiki 5.
Indeed. Great to have you with us, Ton. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Now, we do have a special plan for today. So usually on Hangouts, what we try to do is to keep the conversation on the TiddlyWiki user side of the fence. We try and avoid having detailed discussions about TiddlyWiki development, although we all quite enjoy that, so that happens too sometimes. But today, the proposal is that we focus on obstacles to TiddlyWiki's greater success. So I think that behind that topic, there's a number of things that we probably all broadly agree on, that that TiddlyWiki is cool, and it would be cool if it was more popular. And I think all of us can kind of make a list of things that that slightly get in the way of that. Anyway, the particular prompt was that at the end of last week, I think, Matias posted a message to the discussion group listing some of the obstacles that we've got, and raising the question of what might we do about them. They are, I think, topics that have, in many cases, been discussed in the group before, but they're still current issues, and so it's always worth revisiting those and making sure that the discussion that we have about those things is visible enough. I'm particularly aware that there were some aspects that Matias was asking about that have actually been discussed, I think, on recent Hangouts. And of course, that's actually not great, because not everybody gets to see the Hangouts, and they're quite hard to refer to after the fact. So I thought what we would try to do today, I think the challenge is that we've all got a lot to say about this topic. So the challenge is to keep the discussion structured and useful. So what I was going to do first was to ask Matias to just summarize the original problem as he saw it, what the original challenge was. And then I think we should actually have a discussion about how to have the discussion. So what I want to avoid is, that we could get into a kind of unstructured situation where we're all saying stuff and it's not being kind of properly written down. And I think a great outcome for a discussion like this is that we record something, so that those people who aren't in the Hangout can pick up what we were discussing, and where there are specific proposals or experiments that we want to do, that those are proposed in a written form. So one of the things I'm thinking in the background is that, just for the purposes of the Hangout, it may be worth, for instance, starting up a Google Doc so that we can do some simultaneous editing. So, I mean, for instance, if we did that, what we could perhaps do at the end of the Hangout is make a posting to the discussion group. And I think that would be very useful to keep the discussion sort of folded together. Okay, so with that introduction, Matias, would you like to just give us after you've spoken, I'm going to come back and do a screen share, and we'll actually just whiz through some of the entries in the thread. So it wasn't so much to get you to summarize all of the items that you mentioned, but just give us a flavor for the motivation, what the problem is that you see, and we'll take it from there.
Jeremy, 1 point, can you share a link to the discussion? Is it the GitHub issue?
Let me do that. Forgive me. All time today. So, Matias is beating me too. So there's a link in the sidebar for people who are watching later. The message that we're talking about, and it will be on a screen share shortly, is one with the subject, hopefully not for the next 25 years. And I'm sure even in years to come, there will only be one thread with that subject to be searched for. Matias, over to you.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, for people reading that thread, can I please ask you to read the full thread, because that gives the motivation, not right now, but that gives the motivation for it, and it also clarifies that I did not actually post it to be mean or to, I don't know, to be unconstructive or anything. In fact, the exact opposite. The reason for posting it was that I wanted to hear from the chief developer, obviously Jeremy, what the thoughts are. And that was all. And I wanted to hear it, and that was not all, actually, one more thing. And I wanted to hear it in his words. So I did not want to bring out my own thoughts on the different subjects, because I wanted to get a sense of where the priorities were, and you know, what directions those questions we're going to take in these coming years. Another reason for posting all of them at once, and these are just areas, obviously, that I have identified as obstacles, weaknesses, or whatever you call it. Others, I'm sure, have other ideas. One main reason for posting them all at once was so that we can get some kind of priority those topics in between. You can compare one thing to the other, because I would guess that everyone would agree that those topics are important, but surely some are more important. And by doing that, we can get consciousness in the group of what is actually important. Obviously, in an open source, unpaid project, everyone can do what they want and no one is forced to do anything. However, we can set the tone for where the attention is by simply discussing things that we think should be more prioritized.
Yeah.
So that was that gives the background, I think. Any questions? Anything unclear, please?
No, I was going to say that. I mean, you touched on the fact that in the group there was some confusion as to the tone of what you'd said, and I don't have a problem. I mean, I think it's come up actually in another context this week that the group is pretty widely spread. English isn't the first language for everybody. English is a language in which it is phenomenally easy to give and take offense. You know, it's one of the things that we've designed the language carefully for. I think and hope that the group can easily be tolerant, and let's continue to expect the best from the members of the community, and assume the best, if you see what I mean. And obviously, a concern if we don't see that happening. But
can I add one more thing?
Please do, yes.
Just about the subject title, which was hopefully not for the next 25 years. This refers to, first of all, the 25 years refers to Jeremy's a bit of a tagline, I think. I think it's a good, if it was or is considered a tagline, I think it's a pretty good one, like TiddlyWiki for the next 25 years. However, what happens in the group is that we have this convention, as you know, to put TiddlyWiki 5 within brackets first to make it clear that this is what we're talking about, as opposed to TiddlyWiki Classic. So I realized, though, too late, that what the subject really looks like it's saying, it looks like it's saying TiddlyWiki 5, hopefully not for the next 25 years. And that was not the point. The problems are hopefully not there for the next 25 years.
I mean,
that was the reason.
I mean, it's all. I mean, that kind of confusion, as I say, is unfortunate, and we got to make sure that we don't let that kind of thing happen by accident. But I mean, really, for me, it's quite easy when it's somebody, when somebody like you, Matias, who's been such a strong contributor to the group over the years. You know, I'm not going to jump to the conclusion that you're suddenly adopting that tone. So don't worry. But what I really wanted to pick up on, go on, Eric,
I'd just like to suggest that it's actually not all that unfortunate. While it kind of threw a bit of heat onto Matt, it's actually, it really invigorated the discussion.
Yes,
and brought to the forefront that these are issues that need to be addressed. And so while you took a bit of a heat and flack for the way it came across, the actual effect of that fieriness was to raise the level of concern and attention about these issues to the point where we're having an entire session about it. So I think it's actually not been unfortunate. I think it's actually been fortunate, although but you paid for it. Thank you.
Yes, yes, indeed. I think that's my concern too. Is that it can't be much fun for Matias to have everybody jumping on your head. Right, so one of the things you were talking about was the relative importance of those things, and a point that I made in my posting, my first response to the thread, was that actually when I look at my own behavior, I realize that I have a very strong tendency that that needs to be kept under better control. And that is that out of all the things that I could do, writing blog posts, writing documentation, writing code, debugging code, sorting out the issues list, what I actually choose to do most of the time is write new code for new features. And so that's problematic, because Matias is reminding us that of all the things that are obstacles to TiddlyWiki's success, needing new features is just not one of them. I mean, there are lots of good reasons for adding features to TiddlyWiki 5, but that's not an obstacle to its success. And yet, if we don't make it more successful, there will be a question mark over TiddlyWiki's survival, without putting it too melodramatically. But I mean, in order for me to support myself for these next 25 years working on TiddlyWiki, you know, it's got to be popular enough to generate the revenue for me to do that. So for me personally, that was, you know, and again, it makes it sound like Matias is to blame for some, you know, for some change in Jeremy, change in direction of Jeremy. But it's really not that. It's that I think that even after we finished the beta, I just kind of kept running kept adding more stuff to TiddlyWiki, both in the category of things that I'd always wanted to add before the beta, and in the category of you know, filling in suggestions from people on the group. And as I say, Matias is thinking about the points raised by Matias makes it very clear to me that that has to stop. I've got to got to refactor how much of my time is spent on coding up new features versus documentation. And well, it's not actually just documentation, versus making sure that what we've got is presented as best it can be for its prospective users. So the conclusion from that, or the proposal emanating from those thoughts, is that I propose that we have a moratorium on new features for TiddlyWiki 5 for a few weeks. I've suggested until the end of the year. In fact, I think it's probably going to, the timing's such that it'll probably be until sometime in January. Looking around at other open source projects, a new feature moratorium is not an unusual thing. I think the challenges we have, where we've got a busy, very active community who are continually suggesting and proposing fantastic improvements for TiddlyWiki. I think that's very common that a community has that, and that therefore you end up responding to those desires. And so if you Google new feature moratorium, you'll find a bunch of projects just like ours discussing having a new feature moratorium for exactly the same reasons as we're interested in doing it. So the idea with moratorium, just to be clarify, it means that I wouldn't do any new features for TiddlyWiki 5. So I would be, the kind of thing I'd be trying to avoid doing is things like the export functionality. That was, over the last 2 weeks, that's a rather big new feature that's consumed a lot of time on TiddlyWiki 5. There are, I think there's some sort of edge cases of minor improvements and so on that I'll take on a case-by-case basis. But what I'm really trying to avoid is those kind of multi-day new features. So I think, again, in the thread, I discussed this a bit, how doing the new export functionality, there was a kind of concerted chunk of work to get the basic thing up and running, and then there was much longer passage of time, maybe 5 times longer, just to bed everything down, make the text translatable and so on. And that's what I want to try and avoid, is those having 4 or 5 days where I'm blocked on a single task.
Can I say something?
Jeremy, can I also?
Please do. Sorry, one at a time. Felix, why don't you go first?
Yes. Well, I just wanted to say, to me, the export functionality really made TiddlyWiki a round wiki. I mean, it was the last piece missing in the whole. So I think, I mean, you are really critical about this issue, but I want to tell you, I really appreciate that you did it, because it's a feature that was essential and it was missing. So yes, you're right. But
and I think part of I know what you mean about it kind of completing TiddlyWiki, being able to get data in, being able to get data out. There's a pleasing symmetry to that. I was also frustrated that I hadn't had a chance to do the export functionality before the end of the beta. But no, you're right, and the trouble is that's why it is so tempting to keep doing the new features. I mean, I think having just come out of doing the export feature, I don't know that there's such a big list of features like that remain to be done. But I don't know, search and replace, that would be a great example. Search and replace is a feature that loads of people have asked for. It's clearly necessary. I've got a very clear idea of how I want to implement it. And, you know, it would be great to have it, and yet that's what I've got to avoid. But I take your point, Felix, as very nicely put, and I'm glad you appreciate the export functionality. Matias, you're waving your hand.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate what you're saying, and with the risk of sounding a bit patronizing, but I think in an open source project like this, and no one is getting paid, as far as I know, people really should do what they like doing, or they won't really do it, I think. And I'm guessing that also goes for you, Jeremy, isn't it? I mean, you really, I mean, you're obviously an expert in developing TiddlyWiki. Would you actually enjoy doing the other things?
Yes, no, of course. I mean, well, I'd enjoy the results. So the defining experience of me being me is I kind of forget how terrible the documentation is, and I think that's a big problem. I mean, yes, well, it's not so much that writing documentation is something that I don't enjoy. It's that continually keeping documentation up to date is a particularly taxing task. You know, writing a new passage I find as easy as anybody else. To write a few hundred words on any TiddlyWiki related topic, you know, I could do that. But there's a lot of slog in actually making the documentation fit together and so on. But I've got to do it because nobody else can do it. and I think it's the major obstacle. Sorry, Matias, I should let you.
Yes, I think one key way of dealing with all issues that are necessary and that you or whoever may not really enjoy is to focus on the infrastructure for contributing in those ways, so that people who want to do that, because I'm sure there are people who really enjoy writing the documentation and having other people read it, etc. I'm sure there are people like that. So if we have the infrastructure for that, for delegation, then I think a lot will be solved. So I think the focus should really be on making sure that community members can contribute with their expertise.
Yes, and we've had some interesting case of that. It's actually been around translations. So previously, up until a couple of months ago, to create a translation for TiddlyWiki required the user to use Node.js and to use GitHub. And I guess in October, we engineered it so that there's a special translators edition that allows translators to create their translations in the browser, to not use Node.js and to not have to use GitHub. And as we've discussed in the thread, I think that we need to do something similar for documentation contributions. So I think I'd nominate that as, this is it's a big area, but I think contribution infrastructure or documentation contribution infrastructure is a fairly well-defined little area that we can look at. What I think I would like to do now is actually to go back and, as Matias invited me to just talk through the original post and summarize my thinking on those points. But before I do that, does anybody have anything else to ask or say?
Yeah, Jeremy?
Go for it.
Yeah, the problem is I have to leave in a few minutes, so but I didn't want to be unpolite and to interrupt the main discussion. But I wanted to inform you that I implemented the graph search for TiddlyWiki, and it works very nice. And what I do is when you type a search term, I look at the tiddler you are searching for, and I display all the neighbors in the surrounding area. If we have a minute, I would simply just show you a quick...
Felix, I'd love to, but I actually think we should stay focused on the topic here. If you were around later on, I mean, towards the end of the call...
Yeah, would it be possible if I return in 1 hour and then...
Yes, that would work well.
Yes, I don't want to be unpolite, but
no, it's fine. And look, if that doesn't work, we can also pick it up next week. I mean, the situation remains that the task graph plugin is of great interest to a number of people. I think it would be marvelous to have a demo of the new
Okay, I hope I can join again in an hour or so. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Felix.
Yeah, bye.
So look, I'm going to screen share and just bring up Matias's original post. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
And of course that means that I can't see if anybody joins the group and needs to be, joins the Hangout and needs to be unblocked. So just running through these here then, Matias's first point is about add-ons being difficult to find, or more likely hard to know that they even exist. Then the second point is no quality assurance of add-ons, and I'm just right. Let's take those two. So I think that for me, that's a good summary of the problems with add-ons for TiddlyWiki Classic. So I came into doing TiddlyWiki 5 thinking that aspect of TiddlyWiki Classic hadn't been a great success. The way that over time certain plugins for TiddlyWiki Classic became kind of essential for a lot of people, but the way to get those plugins was still to find them via some random website. And of course, recently we've had the situation where the plugin repositories of some authors have dropped off of the internet, dropped off the web over the years. So I wanted to avoid that, and therefore in TiddlyWiki 5 we have the idea of official plugins. So within the TiddlyWiki 5 repository and distributed on tiddlywiki.com, there's a bunch of plugins, themes, and language packs. So the idea is that those plugins that are part of the TiddlyWiki repo have the same quality assurance as the rest of TiddlyWiki. So let me show you that in the context of the TiddlyWiki repository. So just looking at the, oh, are you still, you're still there. So there's, in the TiddlyWiki repo, there's a core folder that contains all of the things that comprise the TiddlyWiki core. In technical terms, all of those files in there are baked into a plugin called $:/core. Then these three folders, editions, languages, sorry, four, editions, languages, plugins, and themes, contain libraries of editions, language packs, particular plugins, and themes. So most of these plugins and themes are by Jeremy, but not all of them are. TW2 Parser, for instance, is entirely the work of Buggy J, and obviously the translations are entirely the work of the translators. Now, these plugins being official has a few implications. One of them is that when you visit the TiddlyWiki upgrade wizard, it is capable of automatically upgrading any of those official plugins. So the upgrader itself ships with this entire library of plugins, and if it detects an older version of one of these plugins, then it'll replace it with the newer version. So going back to Matias's observations, what we're trying to do on TiddlyWiki 5 is to make plugins, tweaks, and themes sorry, rephrase that, to have we'll always have random people in the world creating plugins, tweaks, and themes for TiddlyWiki. People being able to do that without my help or cooperation is an important thing. You can just sit down and create something for TiddlyWiki, and me and the TiddlyWiki project is not a blocker, or cannot be a blocker for you in doing that. What we've got here is a mechanism for taking certain plugins, themes, language packs, and so on, making them official by putting them in the TiddlyWiki repo, so that they get quality assured with the rest of TiddlyWiki, and so that they can be automatically upgraded. So I think the issue we've got right now is that the TiddlyWiki 5 community does rely on a number of plugins, third-party plugins, that are not in the official library. But often the reasons for that is because those plugins, well, let me give you an example, would be for a long time, Stefan Skeeve did a plugin called New Tiddler plugin that allowed you to do new journal and some similar things. Now, it became clear very quickly that that plugin was very important to a lot of people. However, we didn't make it official. Instead, we refactored the core to solve the problems that it was solving in a better and more extensible way. And I think that's often going to be the case. If you dig up an ancient presentation of mine when I was at BT, you'll hear me saying roughly the same thing, that basically when people contribute a plugin that solves a problem, often the best response for me for that is to take the existence of the plugin as a vote to fix the feature properly. It's tricky. That means that there will always be plugins that are useful to the TiddlyWiki community that cannot be made official TiddlyWiki plugins because there's an alternative plan to fix that functionality properly. Does that make sense?
Can I come with an idea? Is now a good time for that? In a thread that I will post the link to soon, in a thread where I discuss some things with Tobias, we start off with discussing one subject, but it turns into a completely different thing, namely an idea that I think would solve the whole problem with the dispersed plugins and themes and whatever. Namely that we can have official lists, or unofficial even, lists with direct links, URLs, to the plugins. And in those lists, you could also have metadata, such as reviews or opinions or any type of information. And these lists are just plain lists inside a tiddler. And this tiddler can just simply circulate in the community. And it can be, if it's a good list, on tiddlywiki.com, you can have a link to this list, or simply the list itself in a single tiddler. And they can be split up. They can be split up into themes, such as a list focusing on plugins, another for themes or skins, another for beginners, another for multimedia things.
So let me just pick those up. So that is also something that we already have. So part of the TiddlyWiki documentation at tiddlywiki.com is within the community tab is these series of lists. Now at the moment the things that are listed are categorized as articles, examples, resources and tutorials. So we're not specifically listing themes and plugins, but we could. It's just another of these lists. And each entry in the list is a tiddler consisting of a link, and it could of course have other metadata.
Here comes the key question though. Who makes that list? That's pretty much you, isn't it?
Well, that's we've got a lot of
to take your time with such a thing, such a simple thing.
Interconnected concerns here. So one of them is how do we present the plugins, and then we've got an orthogonal question of we need to allow more people than just Jeremy to do content updates, but they're separate. So this part of the discussion is about how we organize plugins, add-ons, and so on. And so I think what I'm trying to say is that I think what we've got is actually what you propose, that there's an official set of plugins. So if I go on tiddlywiki.com, if you go to the plugins entry, these are the official plugins all nicely listed with links and so on, so people can find them. So the official plugins are one click away when you visit tiddlywiki.com. The third-party plugins are in this community listing. The question mark is whether these are the right categories. So the reason why I did it this way was very specific actually, was that many of these resources, such as plugins by the Divo, is a single site with multiple plugins. So I didn't want to have to update the entry, or Daniello's brain test, for instance. There's a whole collection of different plugins and tools, and I didn't want to list them individually because that's going to be quite noisy and is going to need quite regular update. So that's why originally I chose to list not individual plugins, but the repositories where plugins can be found.
I understand that, but I think it's losing out on for instance, the metadata. Do I pronounce that word correct? Meta or meta, or how do I say that? Metadata. Yeah. One thing that makes take you know the apps in App Store for iPhone or add-ons in other software. One
Right,
thing
you're
that
going to talk
really,
about reviews and so on, but we've got the problem there is, so this is why I'm keen to separate these concerns, because we've got to be organized about this. The problem with things like reviews and so on is that we've got nowhere to store them. TiddlyWiki is a static server. Its content comes from GitHub. The only way to get content onto tiddlywiki.com is via GitHub, whether it's me or the contributor themselves who does that. In order for us to have things like votes on tiddlywiki.com, tiddlywiki.com would have to be something else that isn't a static website. So that's a significant obstacle, because that's a technical infrastructure obstacle. At the moment, TiddlyWiki is served by GitHub from GitHub pages. In order for it to have a server application that can process votes and reviews and so on, that means there's gonna actually have to be code running on a server, which might cost money, but more to the point is that it can go wrong and will need maintenance and so on. So that's a big challenge for us. To put any of those interactive features on tiddlywiki.com would require us to completely redesign how tiddlywiki.com is done.
I'll see if I can solve it. I have some small ideas that are not complicated actually. One thing though is how is there any? Nah, forget it. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, Matias, sorry. Let me just show Felix. So I'm going to carry on with the points raised by Matias in the thread. But just before finishing these add-on points, I think the most interesting thing about these being on the list is, the situation is, as I say, that official plugins are directly listed on tiddlywiki.com. Third-party plugins are listed via the community tab. This does make it look as though none of that had communicated itself to you, Matias.
Well, I had seen that, but I assume there is a lot more. I have TiddlyWiki Classic in mind, of course.
Yeah.
And I see that there will be just a plethora of plugins and stuff, and they would need to be reported. And that's not solved really in your otherwise excellent solution.
Well, no, I mean, I think what I'm trying to do though is to make some separation between different topics. And as I said, infrastructure for contributions is a topic. Having a making tiddlywiki.com not be a static server is a topic. It's just one that would take quite a lot to accomplish because it's a big change. So I think,
can I say something? Maybe thinking that like the 18 months ago you mentioned, I finished doing this customized space on TiddlySpace. It would already be usable for TiddlyWiki 5 to perhaps have a more collaborative environment on that is separate from who do every day contribute to such a repository quicker or these let's say developer channels.
Well, I think that we need to do some separation here. So let's imagine that in the case of TiddlyWiki Classic, there's a site called tiddlywiki.org, which is actually served from TiddlySpace, and it's a community-maintained set of resources. I think Toby was heavily involved in creating and maintaining this. So, and I don't know whether you ever had a significant contribution. It looks like you have had contributions from some sunny IT people. So we could do this. We could create on TiddlySpace, we could create a site powered by TiddlyWiki 5 that members of the community could all collaboratively edit. However, that could not become tiddlywiki.com.
That's the thing, it doesn't have to be. It's more like a playground where everybody is collecting stuff.
Exactly. So as a separate site, it's fine, but what I'm getting at is that it doesn't solve, we still have the problem of getting content onto tiddlywiki.com. So that's I think they're somewhat separate concerns there. So I mean,
I think it's a good approach to have a bit of a selection that is really presented on tiddlywiki.com. I mean, is it supposed to be like a collection of information around TiddlyWiki? Maybe not. Maybe it's really the essence.
My goal,
or even, right?
My goal for tiddlywiki.com, for the documentation here, is for it to be the authoritative reference material. So it absolutely has to have the most accurate, complete reference material. For it to have pointers to all of the external resources that are relevant. For it to have some tutorial, and be very careful what I say here. There's two types of tutorial material here. There's tutorials for how to do a specific thing, how-tos. I think they absolutely do belong on tiddlywiki.com, but tiddlywiki.com's selection of them can never be complete. But there's also material about actually starting to use TiddlyWiki in the first place. It's not well presented here. A step-by-step tutorial, and I think that needs to be, I think tiddlywiki.com needs to do that, but it needs to point to other tutorials, because I don't think a single tutorial will ever be adequate for TiddlyWiki, because the material you need in a tutorial depends so much on where you've come from, what you're trying to do, etc. So yes, those are the goals for tiddlywiki.com. The goal for tiddlywiki.com also, though, is that in order for it to be accurate, it cannot allow, it can't be like Wikipedia, just allowing anybody to edit anything. It needs a review process.
So let's say we had maybe some community.tiddlywiki.com TiddlySpace, right, yeah, where collaboration is an element, and we'd have like a handful of like tenets on how to ensure that the most relevant content gets merged to tiddlywiki.com. So we could perhaps, for example, tag something as.
Okay, so that also happens. That also happens at the moment with TiddlySpace. So there's two areas on TiddlySpace that are relevant. There's the community wiki, tiddlywiki.org, and then there's also tiddlywiki-com. This is the space that's used to edit the content that appears on tiddlywiki.com. So anybody, and it's a closed group. You have to be
for the classic.
For TiddlyWiki Classic, yeah. So we were using, we've already gone down that road with TiddlyWiki Classic, where we're using TiddlySpace for two things. It's a staging area for the content of tiddlywiki.com, and it's a community wiki. Now, I think I recommend also that we do a community wiki for TiddlyWiki 5. So we need somebody to step up to the plate to run that, and it's a technical job, but slightly, because nobody has yet used TiddlyWiki 5 on TiddlySpace in that kind of context. So it may need some rough edges smoothed out. However,
if I may, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
Or I would even maybe, can I show my TB5 at least for a second? Or let's say maybe I don't really have to show it.
Oh, I can bring it up here, maybe the easiest.
Yeah, you can bring it up yourself. So I think the basic categories you find there might actually be already good categories for such a
Okay, I think we're a bit away from discussing what the categories are. I think we've still got this, we got this sort of slightly higher level problem, which is what are the repositories where content is stored and how is it updated? And I take your point. I think this is.
And what I mean is, practically, let's just take this thing and upload it to a TiddlySpot, and whoever wants to contribute or work together on this thing, we start on this.
You said TiddlySpot, not TiddlySpace, but you meant TiddlySpace.
This one is on TiddlySpot.
Yeah, no.
Uploaded to TiddlySpace, no?
If you're happy, I mean, the problem we've got with getting a TiddlyWiki 5 based community space on TiddlySpace is finding somebody to be responsible for it. Once we've got that, then great. That person can suggest the structures and so on, just as you've done, Tobias, here. I mean, I think all this structure is you, wasn't it?
Yeah, mostly. Yeah.
So I mean, that can happen again. So that's the easy. I think that is the easy piece. It is within our reach to create a TiddlySpace space of that sort. My memory is that in order to set this up, Chris Dent made this tiddlywiki.org space special in that it has this capability where anybody who is logged in to TiddlySpace has the ability to edit, and that's not the case for a default space on TiddlySpace. So we may need to get some help from Osmosoft to get the same capability on the new TiddlyWiki 5 community space.
Yeah, I think it's that everyone can edit, but not delete. Only members can delete.
Tell me, do we have another URL or another domain because tiddlywiki.org is gone, or do we need some classic and subdirectories?
Probably what we should do, and I think I can do this quite easily, is switch the current tiddlywiki.org to be classic.tiddlywiki.org and use tiddlywiki.org for the new site.
Okay.
And part of the reason for that is every so often I see people passing each other the link tiddlywiki.org when they're trying to link to TiddlyWiki. So I think it's confusing to have an old resource under the modern URL. So that's the easy part, is a TiddlySpace, and Tobias, if you're up for repeating your contribution on TiddlyWiki Classic with TiddlyWiki 5, that would be brilliant. And I can't think of a better person to be trying to coordinate that.
Yeah, so that was maybe the proposition. I mean, I'm not really space internal, so there would need to be somebody else.
There is one big thing, that there is a lot of code that is TiddlySpace specific, which is part of TiddlyWiki Classic. So including spaces, moving spaces, moving tiddlers from private to public spaces, and all this stuff. And there is nothing is part of TiddlyWiki 5 at the moment.
I don't think we need that stuff, in fact, because what you do if you use the current way of using TiddlyWiki 5 with TiddlySpace, you get a different URL to access the space through TiddlyWiki 5. So if you need to do some manage the spaces that you are including or something like that, then you just visit the TiddlyWiki Classic version of the space, and then you can manipulate things as you need.
I'm not sure if that can even be done, but I think all these system space, classic TiddlySpace, they can pretty much all go because they're relevant for TiddlyWiki 5. Is that correct?
Yes, but we could
because TiddlyWiki 5 doesn't.
It doesn't need any of the system spaces, but we could use included spaces as a way of structuring the content.
Yeah, and also including content from different contributors, probably. So yeah, but there are some external tools which make it possible to set the access rights. So this is relatively easy. So I can do this. It's not the problem.
One thing that I noticed was tiddlers or spaces, I'm not sure, or bags that I simply couldn't get out of the space because they were like. And there was no way to remove them from my part, but maybe that's a setup thing like tiddlywiki.org. Administrator can remove them from this new space.
The good thing is that those system tiddlers, those TiddlyWiki Classic system tiddlers, generally don't disturb the operation of TiddlyWiki 5, so it's not the end.
Just the presentation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, as I say, that's the first and easy part. I think what we should also be discussing is, we talked about tiddlywiki.com. We talked about tiddlywiki.org. I think the other related problem area is the Google Groups. So I've made one proposal already, which is that we could close the TiddlyWikiDev group and instead use GitHub and GitHub issues for the same purpose. The reasons for doing so roughly boil down to the fact that GitHub issues is much better for code discussions. You have syntax highlighting, for instance. You can edit things after you've posted them, etc. And again, nowadays, it would be fairly common for all of the technical discussion about a project to be on GitHub. And for as long as, for me, the distinction between the TiddlyWiki group and the TiddlyWikiDev group is about people who are developers, people who work in JavaScript and so on. For those people, I don't think being on GitHub is a problem. So that's a relatively straightforward proposal. Don't need to do it immediately, but all we do is turn the TiddlyWikiDev group into read-only mode, have a message pinned at the top saying go to GitHub. The more interesting case is the main.
Jeremy?
Hello?
There was a problem with the voice for me.
Oh, okay. I'll repeat that. So saying that one of the two discussion groups, we can deal with TiddlyWikiDev by closing it and replacing it with GitHub. The other main TiddlyWiki discussion group, though, is also a problem. Again, not being able to edit titles and posts after they've been posted is a pain. And I think we should, as a long-term goal, be trying to replace the TiddlyWiki Google group with something else. The something else that I would like to explore is, I think, the same thing that Matias was thinking about, is what I would call a distributed, federated setup. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down into this because I think this isn't a topic for immediate action. But to summarize very briefly, a mode of discussion that I really like is that anybody who wants to participate in the TiddlyWiki discussion group needs a TiddlyWiki, and that TiddlyWiki contains a bunch of tiddlers. And that in order to join the group, they register their wiki. And then if they want to reply to somebody else's post, they'd basically make a tiddler in their own wiki that would select the parent post via its URL. Yes, it is decentralized and federated, Nathan. And then we would have on tiddlywiki.com, or maybe some bit of tiddlywiki.org, we'd have in effect a spider that pulls in all these tiddlers from their original TiddlyWikis and presents them in the ordinary threaded discussion format. So the federation approach that I've described is actually rather similar to the smallest federated wiki one. It's the simplest kind of federation where the federated nodes can be entirely static. So by publishing content using conventions for the identifiers of content, people can submit a chunk of content and splice it into the current discussion. So the problem I see with, there's a lot to discuss in there. I've just very briefly summarized an idea, but hopefully what I've done is just is just pointed gently towards decentralized federated approaches, and particularly this idea that in order to participate, that you would you'd need to be able to publish a TiddlyWiki. So hopefully most members of the TiddlyWiki community that would be true for. Matias is asking, is that what TiddlySpace uses? And it's not. TiddlySpace is a classic centralized architecture server. So TiddlySpace is a single database on the web of tiddlers. And its sense of federation is that any entity on the internet can request tiddlers from TiddlySpace and then aggregate them and stitch them together and so on. But TiddlySpace itself is a centralized system. Now, the big challenge I see with all of this is that what I described is fun and interesting, but it doesn't interoperate with email. So my own personal way of working with the TiddlyWiki groups is I have every post delivered as an email, and that lets me answer on my phone and so on. And I think that any replacement for the mailing list needs to have that email interoperability. And that's obviously problematic. I don't necessarily mean posting via email. I don't think that's the challenge. I think the challenge is to be able to read stuff via email. So as I'm bumbling around, I would like my phone to go ping if there's a new post to the group. And I think that's a reasonable goal. Anyway, so I think that's an initiative that we should start now. We should start putting a stake in the ground and discussing what we want and being clear about what it is that we're trying to replace. And to me, it's that. So we've talked a little bit about federation as a way of submitting content to tiddlywiki.com. And I don't think that's such a big driver because, as I said before, tiddlywiki.com needs a content review process, it needs a single editor, it needs to be coherent. And that to me means that it would become harder to manage it if we were producing it in that federated, distributed way. And yes, I think the match between that federated, distributed arrangement and the discussion group is very good. That seems like a good fit. Okay, so any thoughts, Matias?
Yes. I don't think it necessarily has to be harder to manage it. If you delegate things and you have a kind of hierarchy, so that, take for instance plugins, if there's someone who's responsible or wants responsibility for a certain type of plugins and another person for another type, then one guy above that can make sure that he manages those the list of lists, so to say, so that at the top level for tiddlywiki.com, you just make sure that you have at top level you just manage the guys under you, so to say.
I understand what you're saying, that a federated way of working allows for a delegated way of working, I think is what you're suggesting there.
Yes.
I think we can separate these concerns again. I think that the big part of what you said there was giving people in the community responsibilities. So for me, a big theme of something that we don't do at the moment is give people clear roles within the community. Now, I think the TiddlyWiki group, we're incredibly lucky to have many people who are happy to contribute and happy to help. But at the moment, where people should contribute isn't necessarily always clear. So there are some sort of de facto things. So for instance, Mario has done an awful lot of the engineering and helping around getting other people to up and running with producing translations for TiddlyWiki. And so, and yet, what we've never done is recorded on tiddlywiki.com. Mario is the translation coordinator for TiddlyWiki. So that's one of the things that I think we should explore, is defining some roles within the community, things that need to be done, and then inviting members of the community to step up and volunteer for those roles, and to make it just a little bit more formal. So we list on tiddlywiki.com who these people are and what their responsibilities are. And then if we've done that, if we've publicly said Matias is going to invent a new hover skateboard, then of course anybody in the group can nudge Matias and say, "Oi, how are you getting on with that skateboard? Can I help?" But whereas without that allocation of responsibility, that's just not going to happen. So I think with a lot of the things here, I think what we're doing is isolating topics to return to in a bit more detail. But I think here, Tobias was talking about tiddlywiki.org. Tobias should perhaps be the tiddlywiki.org coordinator. We've got a number of people now stepping up to take an interest in helping with the documentation. Similarly, we should appoint a chief documentation officer. So I think that's a very useful technique, and I don't mean to reject what you were saying about the federation versus delegation. It's federation allowing delegation. It's really that I want to start delegating things independently of also needing to re-engineer our technical infrastructure. So I want to start delegating things now, even when we're not a federated, distributed community. Now, look, I'm very concerned that it's 5:20 and I've only got halfway through Matias's list, and these are, I think, important topics. So let me switch back to screen sharing, and hopefully you can see again. So the good thing is that some of these points we have already discussed. So the lacking documentation thing. I mentioned earlier some of the reasons in my perception why my progress on documentation has been poor, and I've also hopefully indicated why I think it is right now the most important thing on my plate. So to flesh that out a little, there's been some discussions on the discussion group in the last few days about features of TiddlyWiki that were not widely known, and the great example is the variable attribute on the list widget, and that really hit me. That's a really basic, really important feature that is essential if you're doing anything complicated with the list widget, and yet the way that the documentation and examples had been presented, it was possible even for people who are quite expert in TiddlyWiki 5 to not know about that. So I think that's a big problem. It means that I can spend all the time I like creating new features, but people simply won't see them or find them without better organized and better documentation. The aggregated knowledge from discussions relies on third-party systems not optimized for us. I think that's about Google Groups. And I've said before, I think it's really clear that Google do not care about Google Groups anymore. They are not putting effort into maintaining or updating it, and it's a poor product that doesn't meet our needs. This one, little insight into what attracts new users, is a very interesting topic. And I think that I have over the years built up a certain level of understanding about that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what I think I'll try to do is just run through these remaining ones. So little insight of user needs, TiddlyWiki applications and behaviours. In fact, again, I feel that I'm in a very privileged position where I do get an awful lot of insight into user needs, and my worry would be the standard one, really, which is whether the people I'm hearing are the right people, as in whether there might be a whole load of people who have very strong needs around TiddlyWiki but happen to not have articulated it in a place where I can see it. But assuming that what I see and hear from the TiddlyWiki community is representative, I think I've got a fairly good view of that.
One thing?
Please do.
Yes, one major aspect of that question is also what repels potential new users. Why do people not hang on to TiddlyWiki if they come here? I don't know if that is the case, but I would guess that some people just don't find it, they don't see that TiddlyWiki solves what they were looking for, or at least they think it doesn't. So that's also part of this question, and my point is that it's quite possible that you have a pretty good view of this, but we don't really know because we don't really measure these things.
The thing that you've raised about what repels people or what puts people off is very relevant, because I think that's what we don't know. So I mean, the people who talk, the people who we get to hear from, are the people who find TiddlyWiki and like it. The people, so that's why I think I've got a fairly good handle on, for those that talk, what they say. But the people who find TiddlyWiki and decide to not go with it, those are the people that I don't hear from at all.
Can I jump in there? I think part of it is, it's very true that, Jeremy, you are in the unique position of being at the center of everything TiddlyWiki. And so your ability to build up an impression of what people need is uniquely based on your being central to everything that's going on. But that I think one of the things that would grow the community a lot is for people who are encountering TiddlyWiki to be able to hear the stories of other people who have used it, and in a coordinated way, sort of a testimonial kind of a thing. And what I'm thinking is, suppose part of the welcome to TiddlyWiki, download it, get started with it stuff says, hey, if you've gotten started with it, you're enjoying this, please take a moment to click here to fill in a little bit of a survey about what you were looking for when you found TiddlyWiki and why you're happy, and add that to the setup, install, the overall experience is to, right, exactly, the interview space. Oh, you had .om, not .com.
Yes. So yes. I fully agree. I think.
But throwing this back into the mix as part of the
people's testimonials is cool, yeah, that's it's a nice way to help people understand what TiddlyWiki could do for them.
And in a more general sense, when I go to the Android store, the Play, what do they call it, Google Play, there's stars. Everyone gets a chance to go back and rate this app, and in a certain way, it tells you whether or not other people are liking this enough for you to give it an extra try. Oh, it's got 4.5 stars. I don't know. Well, I'll try it. And so that kind of the like vote. That's what we need. We need more likes, so that people get a sense of the overwhelming coolness of TiddlyWiki.
I think the thing about what you're getting to here is that the kind of that stuff already exists. Facebook is a mechanism for people to like things and to share how many times it's been liked. To a certain extent, Twitter is too, the way that it counts retweets. So I think some of what you're getting into there is, I don't really think we should be building a system whose purpose is to allow people to share how enthusiastic they are about our product, because I think Facebook and Twitter are already that. So I think for me that part of it would be about trying to make it easier for people to promote TiddlyWiki and to give their testimonials on social media. So
Yes.
I don't
Well,
think
I wasn't actually
when you're
suggesting that we have to build it ourselves. I was suggesting that as part of the experience of getting introduced to TiddlyWiki and starting out with it, we should have a tiddler which says, "Hey, if you've enjoyed this, click here to go put it on Facebook. Here's a like button." Make that as easy as possible for people to link TiddlyWiki socially.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so let's go back to Matias's list. So I'm still marked insight into what attracts
You're
new
not
users.
screen sharing anymore.
Oh, yeah. I've still marked insight into what attracts new users as something I'm going to return.
Steve also joined. Did you enable him?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
So the point about little insight of user needs, I think the clarification I wanted to make in relation to Matias's comment was that the bit that we don't know is what puts people off TiddlyWiki, I think. So we do, people who find TiddlyWiki and like it, we get to hear from them. People who find TiddlyWiki and think it's stupid, we don't get to see them, so we can't learn anything from them. And I think that's a challenging problem. But if we were just running a website, we'd be talking about bounce and the number of people who arrive at the website and just bounce straight off again because they're not interested. So I think that's an area that it's incredibly hard for us to gain any kind of systematic feedback. I mean, I talk to plenty of people who don't like TiddlyWiki, so I get some feedback, but it's nothing like as complete as the positive feedback we get from people who have liked it. This point, challenging to get Tiddlyverse overview, I think that is also in the domain of tiddlywiki.com, that problem. So I think that users should be able to go to tiddlywiki.com and find their way to every other useful aspect of the TiddlyWiki universe. And yeah, that's not always true at the moment. The demanding learning curve for customization, I think there's a couple of elements here that it's watching people learn how to customize TiddlyWiki. It is very clear that omissions in the documentation is a big issue. Now, in fact, the customizations that people want to do, I would observe, are very, very similar. So most of the time, what most people want to change about TiddlyWiki are things that somebody else has already asked about changing. So I'm talking about things like adding a top bar, things like adding a left-hand menu, things like adding a content tab. So I don't think this one is actually as bad as it sounds, because I think some of the customization that people are asking for is deep, complicated customization. It's always going to be complicated, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. The fact that there's complexity within TiddlyWiki isn't a sign of failure. It's an indication that what it does is a complex thing. I think that we can reduce the learning curve for customization by providing better documentation, stroke examples. So maybe some of that split between tiddlywiki.com and tiddlywiki.org. And I think in some cases where we've seen that lots of people are asking to do the same difficult customization, that we can consider making that customization easier in the core. And examples there would be things like the way we made it configurable to add and remove toolbar buttons.
Jeremy, I'd like to just interject that in the consideration of ways of handling the learning curve, I want people to consider Inside TiddlyWiki as a part of that ecosystem.
Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, certainly the more successful TiddlyWiki, Inside TiddlyWiki is at doing that, that relieves a very useful bit of pressure from tiddlywiki.com.
Well, as I see the role of inside TiddlyWiki is as I call them guidebooks. It's tutorials. It's going to be stepwise and practical and down to well, how do I do X, Y, and Z? And there'll be a set. These kind of things that we're talking about will fit into that framework. Whereas the definitive reference of all of the syntax and all of the available functionality that's not really where the inside TiddlyWiki stuff is going to go. I'm thinking that's more of the sort of the TiddlyWiki itself has its own documentation of just syntax. Inside TiddlyWiki is more of a how-to as opposed to a what is it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and I mentioned before. I think it's that there is tutorial documentation on tiddlywiki.com. But it can't. There will always need more, and Tiddly manuals is a great example of something that tiddlywiki.com could never do. Sorry, Matias, you were going to say something.
Yes, I think that we have a very technical way of looking at this, but from a user point, I would imagine that not everyone is so keen on learning everything. Instead, the other approach would be ready-made things like themes, so people don't feel like they have to customize. For instance, it's a bit surprising that there is no really good theme with the top bar or a left side bar or something like that. Con has some input.
Technically, it's not really a theme. Shouldn't be adding a top bar. A theme just has CSS in it. So it would be a plugin that would add a top bar. But you're right. We can reduce the need for customization by presenting custom editions of TiddlyWiki, which are pre-customized for particular applications. I like that. But you will, I think, always get people who express what they want to do as customizing it.
When I work on certain sites for clients that have these sort of, I just call them turn the crank sites. You just plug in your information and it generates a certain layout. And they usually have some page with a half dozen or so alternative layouts. And sometimes they have examples of sites that have been built using those layouts. But they're not necessarily targeted for a particular application or purpose. They're just sort of generic, variations of style. And yes, they're more than just CSS because it does affect things like top bar and sidebar and floating and responsive layout versus fixed layouts and things like that. But what I think people need is a gallery of TiddlyWiki examples that show what can be done. Each of those can be simply picked up and said, okay, I'll start with that one, but that it also should illustrate the range of customizations. But they shouldn't be, specific real-world cases. They should all be the exact same mock-up use case, demonstrating the variations between the selections of what you get when you do it this way and you that way, so that it becomes a simple matter of saying, I like this style, I'll pick this one. And there'll be one example application that sort of, so you can see how the differences in style affect the usage of the application, but that it's not a whole bunch of different, oh, well, this guy did this one and that guy did that one, so we'll just put up a gallery of everybody's stuff. It's not a showcase of what's been done. It's a sample block, really. It's like swatches, color swatches for picking your fabrics. It should be something like that where you simply go, oh no, I like that one, click.
Yes. I also said in my summary first response to Matias's post that that there were two things that I thought I needed to focus on during the moratorium. One is documentation, but the other is better presenting the additions that we have. So at the moment, we've gone to some trouble to engineer TiddlyWiki so that we can offer multiple editions that have different customizations for different purposes, but we're not actually using that capability. So the, for instance, the task management example that you find on tiddlywiki.com, I think that should be part of a to-do edition of TiddlyWiki. And that's the kind of refactoring that I'd like to do during the moratorium. Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes or so. There's been some points in the chat on the right that I thought would be worth picking up. I'm sorry I didn't always do so whilst we were at the relevant part of the discussion. But one particular one that jumped out at me was when we were talking about distributed, federated ways of contributing to the documentation. And I think Ed somewhere raised the problem that wouldn't that, or do we run the risk of, wouldn't federating the public group risk alienating those starting out who need the help the most? And I agree, and I think that what that means, that's why any kind of federated replacement for the TiddlyWiki groups is kind of a long-term project. It needs to be no harder to use than Google Groups is at the moment. And yes, if there was arcane techniques necessary to participate, that would be a big problem. But we could still use the federated techniques for things that I mean, maybe for working on the documentation. But I think we can make it just as easy to use, in fact. And given that our users all know how to use TiddlyWiki, yes, Nathan is saying decentralization magic should be hidden from users. Matias says, what about a common message board? They're all rubbish, Matias. I mean, we've got a common message board. We've got Google's common message board. And yeah, I know that Discourse has one or two additional features that Google Groups doesn't have. But it's still basically, to me, the same problem. It's this 1990s concept of how you run discussions. Yep. So I'm not a huge fan of bulletin boards.
At the risk of being accused of attempting to reinvent the wheel again, I've always been intrigued by the idea of messages as tiddlers, and somehow they sort of just land in a TiddlyWiki that has, by virtue of some clever tagging and summarizing and for each tiddler type of, well, or the list widget type of thing with some filters, you use TiddlyWiki's power of tiddler selection to isolate a thread and find a topic and
sorry, I wasn't through the federated method. The thing that gets federated is individual tiddlers. So yes, but I mean, Matias is saying in the sideboard, why don't we? But people understand message boards, and it would be under our control. So I mean, that's basically the argument why we're using Google Groups at the moment. Yes. So, I mean, really, Matias, I just think that those switching from Google Groups to another thing like Google Groups is not really worth it. To be clear, though, there is no reason in my mind why the user interface to a federated TiddlyWiki-based discussion would be any different looking than a message board. A message board is a list of threads. You click on a thread and you get the nested discussions laid out, and we'd be doing the same thing. So I think your concern is, go on.
Can I ask Eric something? Did you elaborate on this thing that you mentioned just a moment ago that we've been talking about before? Because I think it's worth bringing up,
the messages as tiddlers feeding into a big pile. Well, we had discussed in the past,
I do think, I'm so sorry, but we're getting close to the end. I think we're in danger of discussing the implementation details of the federation method, and I think that's falling into the same trap as we have done before. You know, inventing new stuff is fun and interesting, but there is no way that we're going to get a federated anything in place as a part of TiddlyWiki's infrastructure in the next few months, and yet we need to find things that we can do to improve the situation in the next few months. So what I'm saying about that federated stuff is that we need to set a goal, and I think it's a multi-year goal for TiddlyWiki to migrate from Google Groups.
Okay, so
it's not something we can do immediately, and this is also not the place to discuss the details of how we would do that or what that federated system.
Okay, may I suggest then refocusing back on the sort of the bigger issue with Google Groups. I see a number of major issues. One is we don't control the system itself, so we're at the mercy of what they choose to do or not do with it in the future, or the present or the future. Second, it lacks the kind of customization and the features that could benefit our community, and since they're not being very proactive in doing anything more with it. So there's the idea of who controls it. There's also what features it lacks, and then the third is it's just I don't know if there's a third. I think those are the main 2 points. Is that we don't control it. It doesn't have the right features.
I think if I wouldn't care if we didn't control it if it worked well. So I don't think that's necessarily a big issue on its own. I think the problem is that Google Groups is a dead product. They've not done anything to it for as long as we've been using it. And therefore, I have no trust and confidence that it's even going to be continued to be offered in its present form, let alone that they're going to...
Okay, so then the first question is, if it's a several-year process to migrate to something else, the first question is there anything currently being offered that represents a viable alternative to Google Groups, where we wouldn't be reinventing anything, would simply be going to a different system?
So there's a slight misunderstanding here. I'm not suggesting that we should make a shopping list and go out and find a different collaboration system to replace Google Groups. I'm saying that we should, as a mark really of a healthy group that is confident in its technology, that we should eat our own dog food with TiddlyWiki for the discussions. So for me, moving to another third-party system is what I was saying about Discourse. Discourse is an open source bulletin board system. It's quite popular, but I just don't see the value of switching to something that's almost exactly the same as Google Groups with, to me, very superficial minor improvements.
It would be at best a stopgap.
Yeah, whereas there is real interest amongst TiddlyWiki users in supporting these federated ways of working. So if we figure it out for us, for the TiddlyWiki community, that also makes those techniques available to everybody else as well. And I think that that's a good long-term goal. Needs to be something that's exciting and interesting, and takes us into fresh territory that lets us do new things. So I want to, given that it is a complicated business moving what we've got, I think we've got to make sure that what we move to is really valuable and worthwhile and in the interests of the group and opens up possibilities, etc. Now, I think it's 1748. So I think we should draw towards the close. I'm not sure if I'm missing useful things in the sidebar. Okay, so now there's quite a lot of
suggesting
it would be hard to I don't think it's worth talking through all of that. Sorry, Tobias, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just suggesting, like, what about a dummy GitHub repository which is not about submitting code or pulling pull requests or any of that, but basically centralized around communicating around issues. That could be Tiddler folder, Tiddlers and whatever, but without the core TiddlyWiki development stuff. Just a basic thing where people can post questions, choose, apply labels, all this stuff. The labeling could even be when there are new issues being posted. Somebody who one says, okay, this is about tags, this is about widgets, this is about whatever.
Proposing a GitHub repo that contains a TiddlyWiki wiki that people can submit questions and answers to. So it sounds like that's an alternative way of implementing tiddlywiki.org, really, basing it on GitHub rather than TiddlySpace.
Well, not really, because tiddlywiki.org would be for. I was really talking about replacing the Google groups with GitHub.
Okay, so I think in that case it's quite easy. That what I've learned about GitHub is that using GitHub for, well, I've got to be careful. I mean, using GitHub issues, I think anybody can use GitHub issues. I think they're fairly straightforward.
I think so.
But making pull requests in GitHub is not something that we can expect most members of the TiddlyWiki community to do.
Yes, but the point was that wouldn't be designed to use the communication tools GitHub offers around communicating. So it doesn't have to be related to any actual code.
But what's the difference between doing that and just using the issues in the TiddlyWiki 5 repo instead of the TiddlyWikiDev group?
Because this would be total overload for the TiddlyWiki 5 GitHub repository. You want TiddlyWiki 5 development, and maybe, but like just talking all the different things that can be talked about in a group for TiddlyWiki.
Can I?
That would be total overload.
Can I add something here?
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is also TiddlyWiki 5, the TiddlyWiki 5 repository is used for, as Tobias said, for code issues, and you close issues after an issue is solved.
Yes.
But if you use, if you would use it as a communication board where you discuss actual problems which should stay there for other people to look at, it wouldn't be the right solution to use TiddlyWiki's repository, because there you close issues and people don't look at the issues anymore. But using a repository which is separate, you could tag the issues, you could rename the issues, you could
assign users.
Okay, I understand what you mean. That so no, I don't know that doesn't sound that appealing to me. I think what you're saying is that GitHub isn't suitable. GitHub issues is not suitable as a replacement for the TiddlyWikiDev group because of the way that the life cycle of an issue on GitHub is that it gets closed, and we want activity.
Something.
Yes.
The dev group should certainly merge to the TiddlyWiki 5 GitHub repository. That's,
no, I think
that I have no doubt.
Well, I think that the point that you're making actually undermines moving the dev group to the TiddlyWiki 5 repo, because what you're saying is that
no, supportive of, but what the idea that I was just suggesting was something other. It was moving the main Google group to a kind of like empty GitHub. Use the communication features of GitHub. Use talk discussion.
But then I think that's equivalent to moving the main GitHub group to Discourse or something. It's just moving from
to what?
Sorry, it's equivalent to moving the main Google group to discourse. All it is moving the Google group to some other piece of bulletin board software. And in this case, you're suggesting doing it with GitHub, which is not even what GitHub is really designed for. I mean, the reason I think GitHub makes sense for TiddlyWikiDev is, is so that all that automatic linking of commits and tickets and so on that you get. So, okay, well, look, I was going to say, I think at this point we need to summarize where we are. And so let me try and do that. So I think out of, there's a lot more we could discuss, I should say, but, and I'm sorry we haven't got time to go on for longer, but there's a few discrete, concrete issues that fall out of this discussion, which I think need to be taken forwards. So one of them, the easy one, is collaborating on tiddlywiki.com documentation, and that is now happening on a specialist Google group called TiddlyWikiDocs. And once I get a 5.15 out of the way and released, I will participate in that effort on TiddlyWikiDocs. The second thing is the moratorium after 5.15. Third thing is appointment of roles within the community. The fourth thing is contribution infrastructure. How can we make it easy for, sorry Stephen, it's TiddlyWikiDocs, the group called. How can we make it easier for people to contribute to the TiddlyWiki documentation? Fifthly, we've got tiddlywiki.org, bringing that up on TiddlySpace. And then sixthly, we've got the testimonials proposal that Eric made. So I think all of those, all six of those, are actionable now. So the doc stuff's already happening, moratorium's already happening. The roles organizing, I think that's for me to, with some help, to kick off a thread on what those roles are. So it doesn't need to be me that kicks it off, but basically I think don't start with Johnny should be chief such and such. What we need to start with is a breakdown of the roles. And what I would expect is the roles in our project would be very similar to other open source projects. So I'd be expecting to look at other open source projects and how they're organized and to try to learn from them. The contribution infrastructure is also currently under discussion on the group, and that discussion should continue. It's a nice, meaty technical area. My goal is very clear, that I would like anybody who knows how to use TiddlyWiki to be able to edit a local copy of the tiddlywiki.com content and then submit it, and for us to have an easy workflow that allows us to review those changes. So it's a very tight goal. It's not about making it so that people, so it's a reasonable prerequisite that in order to contribute, people have to already know and understand TiddlyWiki. But they should not have to know GitHub. They should not have to know TiddlySpace. They should be able to just work with email and TiddlyWiki itself. The testimonial stuff, I think, well, there's a couple of ways that that could be taken forwards. And then the tiddlywiki.org proposal, which, notwithstanding me saying that we shouldn't be appointing Johnny chief such and such officer, Toby is expressing a keen interest in kicking off tiddlywiki.org. Now, whoever does that, they will need some help from me, I suspect, to get TiddlyWiki 5 running properly, and of course I'm very happy to provide that. Any thoughts on that summary? And then I've got a couple of things to say, and then we'll throw it open again. So is that, I mean, those 6 points, I think that's what I need to summarize in a post back to the group after, which I will try to do later tonight. There was a couple of points that I haven't addressed yet in Matias's original post. So one was too few developers. And that's a really interesting one. There's a couple of facets. Yes, there are too few developers. To be more specific, there are too few developers who are familiar with the TiddlyWiki core. The good thing is the number of developers that are familiar with the TiddlyWiki core is increasing all the time. We've had Felix, who's here. I've been able to watch him along with Daniela, Tobias, and a few other people over the last few weeks get to grips with the core code and how it works. And as we discussed before, the fact that Felix, for example, was able to get such a complex plugin up and running shows that it is possible for people to learn how to be a TiddlyWiki core developer. So I'm happy that the conditions are right for there to be more developers. I think the thing that's most unusual about TiddlyWiki is the balance of developers to users. Most open source projects are designed to be consumed by developers, and TiddlyWiki is designed to be consumed by end users. So although I endlessly bang on about how we need to look at what other open source projects do so that we can learn from them, we also need to, in doing that, we need to recognize what differentiates us from other open source projects. And I think that that's a huge difference. That not only are we not aimed, is TiddlyWiki not aimed exclusively at developers, it's aimed at giving end users some of the capabilities that normally developers take for granted. So I don't know, I don't feel that that's anything I need to do anything about beyond the fact that the developer documentation could always be improved. But each time somebody like Felix makes it over the hurdle of becoming familiar with TiddlyWiki's internals, the easier it is to get the documentation updated and so on. The final point I just wanted to pick up on was this point about insight into what attracts new users. And that's a topic that I've been involved in so many discussions about. When I was at BT, one of the things that the team, Osmosoft, was quite keen to do was to try to make TiddlyWiki, if I can put it this way, to be more conventional. So this is back in 2008, 2009. There was a feeling that when you went to tiddlywiki.com, what you saw was a complicated thing that was probably quite scary. When you went to most open source project homepages, you got a nice sort of description of what the project was about and then pointers to go off and learn more. And the more I found while I was at Osmosoft, that the more we tried to present TiddlyWiki as if it was a conventional application, a conventional web application that worked in the normal way, the less interesting it seemed to me. And in fact, I think there's a comment in the sidebar that I actually think the hello there tiddler at the moment that we've got on tiddlywiki.com is slightly like that. It talks about TiddlyWiki being a notebook, and it doesn't really evoke what TiddlyWiki is like and what the possibilities are when you start to use it. It makes you think that TiddlyWiki is just another electronic notebook, and that's a category that's quite full, I think. So Matias is saying maybe a video on hello there, and that is the plan. I did this introduction video that you may have seen recently, and the plan is to link that directly from hello there. So where I was going with this anyway was that something that's happened so often that I've started to think that there is a pattern to it is that I will talk to somebody who is enthusiastic about TiddlyWiki, and what they've picked up on is very close to what I think. So I think that TiddlyWiki reflects the way that I like to think my brain works, and I've said this a few times, that my sort of mental model of what's going on inside my head is little chunks of stuff with links in between them. And so for me, there's a good fit between how my brain works and what TiddlyWiki does and how it presents itself. And I think there's quite a few people out there for whom that is the case too, that they stumble on TiddlyWiki, they start to play with it, and then they recognize something that reflects their own interests, their own way of thinking about the problem at hand. And that's, yeah, that's kind of interesting, because it's the opposite of the normal way that we're expected to sort of explain and promote products. I think what I'm trying to say is that one of the things that is appealing to some people about TiddlyWiki is its unconventional nature. And yet, in the quest to try and make TiddlyWiki comprehensible to as many people as possible, the risk is that you hide its unconventional nature, that one presents it as if it was, in this case, an online notebook, when in fact it is much more than that. And so what I've become distrustful of is attempts to simplify explaining what TiddlyWiki does. And what I've come to worry about is that the more we do that, the more people will just not see the things that are appealing about TiddlyWiki. So sorry, Matias, very rambling comment on that point, but and I'm not sure that I've really captured everything that I was trying to explain, but I've made a start. And I guess picking up a couple of comments in the sidebar, I'm very much in favor of videos. So I think that video now is the best way to tell a story on the internet. It's not actually my preferred way. I'd much rather read a chunk of text. But I see on the tube people watching YouTube videos, people watching online videos on their phones. It's a very common way to work. And the great thing for us is with a video you can show rather than tell. And I think attempts to explain what TiddlyWiki does in words can just make it sound really complicated and not very interesting. But many of the important characteristics you can actually quite clearly just show people. So I guess what I'm trying to say is a mixture of, right at the heart, I think it's important that TiddlyWiki presents itself as what it is, as an unconventional, radical solution to a problem that's important, and that that it must show, to Eric's point, that it's addressing that problem in a way that has been successful for lots of people. That it's not just a punt in the dark. So we've got to be proud of TiddlyWiki's nature. We've got to be proud of its unconventional architecture, unconventional capabilities, and we've got to make sure that that stuff is still visible on the outside, whilst still trying to make it to make it as easy as possible for people to assimilate what TiddlyWiki is about. Yeah, so to seeing in the thing in the sidebar, we need an official elevator pitch, or several. Yes. So the combination. There's another point that we've raised before, which is about additions. So I think there's a combination of things we need to do. That TiddlyWiki.com needs to explain itself to some degree so that people can understand what it's for and what it's about. But it needs to, as quickly as possible, invite people to explore a domain-specific. Oh, sorry, I've really explained that badly. It needs to, as quickly as possible, give people a menu of additions so that the discussion stops being about tiddlers and all the sort of generic TiddlyWiki stuff and moves to being a discussion in terms of the user's problem, be that how they track their tasks or how they track their academic research. So I think of that as being, like two separate ends of the bridge. One is us talking about TiddlyWiki, and my concern is that we don't dumb it down, that we represent it for what it is, and we're not afraid of shying away from its unconventional nature. And then at the other side, we try and root people in the specific tasks that they're trying to do with TiddlyWiki, and that the additions is the mechanism to do that. So I always imagined that TiddlyWiki would say something like, "Hey, I'm TiddlyWiki. I'm a general purpose thing that can do all of this stuff. You now choose, do you want to run it on the Node.js? Do you want to run it on the server? Do you want to run a to-do list edition, a veterinary college edition, a run my local church edition, a track my genealogy edition?" You know, a nice little menu of a dozen editions that people can pick up on. When they start trying to use one of those editions, the documentation again is in terms of the tasks that the edition is there to help them perform. Excellent. Somebody poke Jeremy, I just saw Tobias saying. What do I need poking about? Good phrase. Own it like a document, use it like a website. Yes, that's one of Eric's. Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, somebody started a TiddlyWiki slogan thread on the group. It's a really fun topic, and you know, again, I've in the past learned quite a lot from the kinds of from people's suggestions in those terms. I actually think TiddlyWiki already has a couple of taglines: the non-linear reusable web notebook thing, and a reboot for the next 25 years. So I don't think we're actually looking for a singular new subtitle, but I think having slogans and so on is nice. They're useful things useful, easy ways to summarize quite conceptually complex points to put across to people. Okay, so any other thoughts or comments from anybody before we close? Okay.
Yes, one thing.
Yes.
A big thank you, Jeremy, for bringing this up, and for thank you to everyone here for participating in these matters that I am really concerned about. Obviously, you didn't do it for me, but I thank you anyway. Thank you very much.
Well, it's fair to say I'm really pleased to. I so often say variants like this. Can you imagine what working on TiddlyWiki would be like if I was just doing it on my own? And it is, you know, these discussions are incredibly helpful. I don't think I could do something like this that's taken so many years of effort and so much sort of concentrated, I don't know, energy, if it wasn't for these kinds of interchanges. And you know, knowing that everybody else is concerned about the same problems, the same obstacles, is a great comfort. Sorry, great comfort makes it sound like I'm depressed, but I'm really not. I mean, oh, actually, that is the one other thing that I'd like to close on, which is to screen share again. That something that is, how do we get there? It's this. So this is the main TiddlyWiki group, and oh, there we go. This is interesting. This is a number of posts per month, and so far in November we've had 1,466 posts. Previous maximum was January of this year when there was 1,300. So this, you know, if this curve carries on in 3 months' time, I'm going to be unable to. I'll be completely overwhelmed by the volumes on the group. But I think that's a really positive thing. You know, one of the first indicators, I think, hopefully, it is one of the first indicators of TiddlyWiki turning a little bit of a corner in terms of popularity. Because whatever else we do to try and bring in more people, the heart of the TiddlyWiki community is us lot on the groups, and it's the activity, particularly around the mailing list. That is the TiddlyWiki community, and I think what that graph is showing is that the TiddlyWiki community is getting a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. And that's thanks to you guys. So welcome back, Tobias, and thank you again, Matias. Any other comments or thoughts from anybody?
I would just like to take this opportunity to make a gratuitous plug for Inside TiddlyWiki. It's an Indiegogo funding project right now, and I don't have the link to but if you go to Indiegogo.com and look for Inside TiddlyWiki, we're on a funding campaign, 60 days. We launched about 8-9 days ago now, and we're making good progress. But we need to keep spreading the word, so tell everyone you know that you really love TiddlyWiki, and that what you want for the holidays is for them to help fund Inside TiddlyWiki, so that you can get the book when it's done. So yeah.
And can I add to that?
Please say.
Also tell everyone that the author of that book is the absolute top developer in the community and the absolute top contributor when it comes to sharing knowledge. So he's the top qualified guy to do it.
Yes, I think that's right. I think Eric is the perfect guy to do this.
Aw, shucks.
Guys, so thank you very much. I'm going to, we'll do our normal waving goodbye, and I'm going to stop the broadcast, and I'll stay online for a couple of minutes. But cheers, thank you very much once again for giving up your time. Much appreciated.